My wife said, "Go to a hotel, my family's visiting." My calm dollar decision ended the marriage, because when I returned, she and her parents had already taken everything. I'm Michael, 36, a logistics manager, the guy who keeps everything moving while everyone else gets the credit. I guess that's why my marriage made sense at first. Emily, my wife of 5 years, came from a world where appearances were the whole religion. Her parents, Charles and Deborah, lived in a house so spotless it looked laminated, the kind of place where you'd get judged for breathing too loudly. To them, I wasn't a son-in-law. I was a temporary renovation project. The scruffy Pittsburgh guy who fixed his own car, grilled his own steak, and didn't understand the sacred art of matching throw pillows. Emily used to joke that I was functional, not aesthetic. Usually after I spent an entire weekend repairing something she'd never thank me for. The more I did, the less I seemed to exist. And just when I thought invisibility was the worst feeling a husband could have, Emily proved me wrong, because eventually, she decided my existence didn't fit the picture at all. That evening, when I walked through the door, Emily greeted me with a smile I knew too well. The kind of smile she used for waiters, neighbors, and Christmas card photos. Polished, rehearsed, hollow. The kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes anymore. "My parents are coming for the weekend," she announced, already turning away toward the kitchen island where she had perfectly aligned a stack of magazines. Faces of strangers smiling back at us in curated living rooms that didn't look lived in. "Great," I said, dropping my work bag. "I ordered their favorite wine. The one your dad likes." She barely glanced at me, just a shrug, elegant and bored. "Actually, I need to talk to you about that." I waited. She didn't look at me, just smoothed the edge of a dish towel like it was responsible for upsetting her equilibrium. "Can you stay at a hotel?" she asked finally. I blinked. "For the dinner? For the weekend?" I thought I misheard. Then she added, as if clarifying something obvious, "We're doing family photos. Mom doesn't want a stranger's face on the Christmas card." I actually laughed at first. A short, confused laugh. Stranger? I'd been in their lives for nearly a decade. I built the deck at her parents' lake house. I replaced their water heater. I fixed her mother's SUV during a snowstorm without being asked. "Emily, what are you talking about?" She sighed, annoyed that I was making this harder than it needed to be. "It's not a punishment," she said slowly, like I was a child struggling with pronunciation. "It's just atmosphere, aesthetic. The card is supposed to be cohesive." "Cohesive?" I repeated. "And I'm not cohesive? Please don't make this dramatic." She rubbed her forehead. "You know how my mom is, and you know how you get captured on camera." I opened my mouth, closed it. "How I get captured on camera? You look tired, and big, and unpolished. Mom says the card should feel elegant." Elegant. I stood there, covered in dust from a 12-hour shift at the warehouse, still wearing the steel-toe boots that paid for half the renovation projects she bragged about online. All day long I had solved last-minute shipping crises, rescheduled trucks during a storm, handled 2 forklift breakdowns, and managed a team that relied on me to keep their hours stable. I kept the world moving, and the reward, apparently, was being cropped out of my own life. I didn't yell. I didn't ask who she thought she was. I didn't remind her how many times I'd sat silently through her parents' thinly veiled insults disguised as concerns. I just nodded, understood, because something inside me, something that had already been thinning, finally snapped into silence. Not anger, not grief, just a quiet, hard, frozen clarity. If I'd said anything then, maybe she would have realized something was ending. But she didn't. She just let out a relieved breath, as if I'd done the civilized thing. "Thank you," she said, already texting her mother. "This really helps." I watched her, phone in hand, smiling again. This time a real smile, bright and genuine, one I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Funny how a person can look most alive when they're erasing you. I went upstairs to shower. The water hit my back like gravel. Every minute of the day, every forklift alarm, every shipment delay, every overtime approval, pressed into my spine. But none of it felt as heavy as the fact that my wife wanted me hidden like clutter before company arrived. While I scrubbed my hands clean, a memory pushed itself forward. Our wedding photos. The way Emily stood stiffly beside me, repositioning my boutonniere every 5 minutes because it kept tilting. The photographer telling me to relax my shoulders. Emily telling me to try smiling smaller. Even back then, I'd been a misfit puzzle piece forced into a picture that looked better without me. When I came downstairs, Emily was already rearranging furniture, clearing space for her parents, adjusting pillows to angles that no human sits against. She looked up only long enough to say, "I booked you a room at the Madison Hotel. It's nice. Clothes. Comfortable. Comfortable." That word used to mean something. Now it was a dismissal with a bow on top. I put on my jacket. "I'll head out early, so I'm not in the way." She nodded, relieved. Smart. Smart. Functional. Not aesthetic. As I stepped outside into the cold evening air, I realized something. I had been leaving this house for years. I just hadn't carried my bags yet. And for the first time in our marriage, the silence I walked into felt like mine. Not something she assigned me, but something I claimed. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I woke up before my alarm, stared at the ceiling, and realized there was nothing left to debate, postpone, or justify. I'd spent years smoothing over tension like a logistics spreadsheet. If I optimized every variable, maybe the marriage would run on time. But now the system had already failed, and I wasn't interested in salvage operations. I got out of bed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table I built, sanded, and stained while Emily complained it didn't fit her modern farmhouse vision. I opened my laptop, pulled up the number for our property manager, and called. "Morning, this is Michael Thompson. I'd like to terminate my lease early." The manager sounded startled. "Termination? The whole unit?" "Yes, effective immediately." He explained the penalty, $4,800. I didn't flinch. I didn't negotiate. I paid on the spot. For years, Emily accused me of being too cautious with money, too methodical. Funny how fast a man can move when he's finally done pretending. Within hours, movers were at the door. I pointed at everything that was mine before the marriage, and that was nearly the entire apartment. The couch, the dining table, the bed frame, the dresser, the bookshelves, the lamps, the rug in the entryway, all mine. Emily always wanted to redecorate but never actually bought anything. She preferred vision boards and digital carts she'd abandoned once she found a new aesthetic. By noon, the place looked like a showroom after a clearance sale. The movers packed quietly. They didn't ask questions. Maybe they'd seen this scene before. Someone leaving quietly, someone finally choosing themselves. At 2:30 p.m., I heard the door unlock. Emily walked in humming, fresh from her manicure. Nails pale pink with tiny gold accents. The kind her mother approved of. She didn't even notice the missing furniture at first. She just set her purse down, pulled off her sunglasses, and turned toward the living room. Then she blinked. Her eyes scanned the empty space. The missing coffee table, the absent armchair, the bare walls where my framed photos used to be. And instead of shock, fear, or anger, she let out a soft exhale. "It feels minimalist," she said, almost admiringly. "So much cleaner like this." I actually had to turn away so I wouldn't laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was too perfectly on brand. She didn't even realize the room looked that way because half her husband had vanished from it. I pointed to the dining table, the only large piece left, because I wanted her to see the note. A folder lay neatly in the center. Inside was the lease termination notice, the zeroed-out utilities, the final payments for everything tied to my name. On top was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Since I don't fit into the family photo, I'm stepping out of the frame completely. Michael." I didn't wait for her to read it. I just walked past her, grabbed my duffel bag, and left. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was oxygen. The next morning, I imagined the scene as her parents arrived. Charles inspecting the lobby like it personally offended him. Deborah clutching her designer tote like it was a fragile heirloom. Emily probably rehearsing excuses on the elevator ride up. But I didn't have to imagine much, because the concierge later confirmed every detail in a voicemail. Mr. Thompson, just updating you, your wife and her parents came by. When they arrived, the power was off per your request. The internet as well. The unit was empty. I handed them the termination notice, as instructed. I pictured Deborah gasping, Charles frowning as though I'd misaligned the universe, Emily frozen, trying to calculate how to spin this into something that made her look innocent. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a small motel off Highway 183, sipping burnt motel coffee and flipping through a paperback I hadn't had time to read in months. No noise, no curated smiles, no judgmental in-laws, just silence, the real kind, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even relieved. I was simply present. It was the first morning in years where I wasn't performing, adjusting, minimizing myself to fit someone else's aesthetic. And as strange as it felt, I realized something. Leaving wasn't the explosion. Staying had been. This was just the cleanup. My phone started vibrating before Emily even left the building. At first it was a single call, then another, then 10 more lined up behind each other like frantic trucks waiting for a loading dock that would never open. I didn't answer. After the 15th call, she switched to texts. Long, hysterical blocks of messages where punctuation died somewhere in the middle. You're insane. We have a photo shoot in 2 hours. The apartment is dark. Why is it dark? The air conditioning is off. It's like a sauna in here. Michael, answer the phone right now. I sat on the motel bed, drank my terrible coffee, and watched the messages pile up without emotion. It was strange how quickly a person's crisis could lose its power the day you stopped volunteering to carry it. Then came the call I had been expecting. Charles. The man spoke like a judge delivering a sentence. Slow, pompous, offended on principle. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail anyway. When I finally listened, his voice was already trembling with entitled rage. Michael, this is unacceptable. You've humiliated my daughter. She and Deborah are distraught. The photographer had to be rescheduled. We booked a hotel because your apartment was unlivable. You will reimburse the full amount. $5, $200, or I will take legal action. Legal action. Over an apartment I legally vacated. Over utilities I had every right to shut off. Over a photo shoot I wasn't supposed to contaminate with my presence. I typed back one line. Think of it as a character-building experience. You always said hardship builds integrity. I didn't add Charles. He didn't deserve a salutation. He didn't reply, probably choking on his gluten-free rage. Emily, however, doubled down. Her text shifted tone every few hours like weather patterns. First rain, then sunshine, then a tornado. I can't believe you did this. Became. We can fix this if you just talk to me. Which became. This isn't the man I married. Which became. You'll regret this. You can't walk away from 5 years like this. And then, predictably, you're emotionally unstable. My parents think you need therapy. A week passed. I went back to work. Clocked in. Managed my team. Filed reports. Restocked inventory. No drama, no scenes, no explanations. I slept in the motel for a few nights, then moved into a short-term rental, small, clean, quiet. No framed quotes about living your best life. No designer pillows that cost as much as my tools. Just walls, light, space to breathe. That's when the next move came. Monday morning, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door, sat down, and gave me the look managers reserve for brace yourself. Mike, we received an anonymous complaint through the ethics hotline. Someone accused you of using company funds for luxury living. I almost laughed. Luxury living? In a motel with a flickering lamp and a sink that whined like a dying raccoon? My boss sighed. They claimed you were funneling shipping reimbursement money to pay for hotels, vacations, upgraded housing, the works. He leaned forward. I'm supposed to investigate. So I did. I nodded, calm. And whoever filed it didn't bother to check that accounting tracks every reimbursement to the cent. He slid a printed sheet across the desk. All clean. Every expense legitimate. Every travel record exact. There wasn't a single discrepancy. Then he lowered his voice. IT traced the complaint. I raised an eyebrow. He tapped the paper again. C. Hartwell business at Charles Hartwell. Her father. The man who called me temporary. Who once corrected my posture at his dinner table. Who refused to shake my father's hand at our wedding because mechanic hands don't suit formal events. And now he was trying to sabotage my job. My boss shook his head in disbelief. I'm filing the complaint as retaliatory misconduct. He tried to impersonate an employee and weaponize the ethics line. That's a federal issue. Do you want to press charges? I thought about it. About Emily's last text. You're only hurting yourself. About Charles lecturing me for years about ambition, presentation, image. About Deborah clutching her pearls every time I said, fix it myself. Then I thought of the motel room, the silence, the morning coffee with no judgment attached. And I realized something key. I didn't need revenge. I needed distance. No, I told my boss, just document everything. I'm not engaging. He smiled. Good call. Their mess, not yours. Another piece of the Hartwell aesthetic cracked that day. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture in the porcelain mask they'd worn for years. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Emily tried once more that evening, one last desperate attempt. We can meet for dinner. Just talk. Don't be like this. I stared at the message. For the first time since I'd left the apartment, I felt something close to peace. Detachment, maybe, or closure. Either way, I let the message sit unanswered. Their aesthetic had collapsed. But I hadn't. I'd simply walked out of the frame first. I learned about the TikTok the way most people learn about disasters. Secondhand, early in the morning, before my brain had fully turned on. A coworker texted me a link with a confused, "Dude, is this about you?" Against my better judgment, I opened it. There was Emily, framed perfectly in soft morning light, sitting in front of two suitcases she had probably arranged there for dramatic symmetry. Her mascara was smudged just enough to look tragic, not sloppy. She sniffled on cue. "My husband threw us out," she said, voice trembling. "We lost everything. 5 years together. And he just left." No mention of the part where she asked me to stay in a hotel because my face didn't fit her mother's Christmas card theme. No mention of the part where her parents tried to sue me over a photo shoot. No mention of the anonymous work complaint filed from her father's business email address. Just the curated tragedy of a woman abandoned by a cruel man. The internet loves a villain, and I'd just been cast as one. By morning, the video had 500,000 views. Comments flooding in. "Men are trash. File for everything, girl. You deserve better. Stay strong, queen." I didn't respond. I didn't post a counter video. I didn't message her. Instead, I forwarded the link to my attorney, Megan Vance. Megan called me 20 minutes later, already in lawyer mode. "Michael, congratulations," she said dryly. "You're officially the victim of public defamation. I'll send a cease and desist to her and both parents. The video will be gone by tonight." It was. By dinner time, her entire TikTok page was wiped clean, replaced by a single vague post. Taking time to heal. Social media break. But if there was one thing I'd learned about the Hartwells, it was that retreat wasn't defeat, it was regrouping. I was proven right 3 days later. I went to my storage unit that morning to grab a toolbox. When I opened the door, the unit looked wrong. Too empty. Gaps where my belongings should have been. My vinyl collection gone. My workshop tools gone. My leather recliner, the one thing in life I'd splurged on, gone. At first I thought I'd mixed up the unit numbers. But no, my lock was still intact. Then I saw it. A faint scrape across the concrete. Fresh tire marks. A strip of torn packing tape on the floor. They had used a mover. By the time I stepped outside, there it was. A hired truck idling outside the Airbnb complex where Emily was staying with her parents. Charles was directing movers like he was supervising a corporate merger. Deborah hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Emily stood with her arms crossed, satisfied, as if stealing my belongings was simply course correction after an inconvenience I'd personally imposed. I didn't storm over. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I took out my phone and made one quiet call. "Hi," I told the dispatcher, calm as a clock. "I'd like to report an active burglary in progress. My storage unit was broken into. I'm observing the stolen items being unloaded right now." The police arrived in 7 minutes. Uniformed officers stepped out, took one look at the furniture being unloaded, and the entire tone of the afternoon changed. Charles puffed up like a swollen rooster, ready to argue, but the officers weren't having it. "Sir, put the chair down," one of them said firmly. "This is all a misunderstanding," Charles insisted. "My daughter has rights. She's his wife." "She's his estranged wife," the officer corrected. "And this unit is registered solely in his name." Emily tried to intervene. "It's just stuff." I stepped forward then, hands in my pockets, voice level. "Then buy it at IKEA." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. A couple of nearby Airbnb guests peeked out their windows, cameras subtly raised. If the Hartwells hated anything, it was being witnessed without control of the lighting. The officers made Charles and the movers reload every piece back into the truck. The sight of him sweating over my leather chair was educational. For all his talk about dignity, the universe had a sense of humor. Deborah cried into a tissue. Emily paced frantically, trying to spin a narrative no one was asking for. And Charles, red-faced and shaking, glared at me like I'd personally insulted his lineage. When the truck finally drove away with my things back inside, one officer approached me. "You want to press charges?" I thought about it. About every insult disguised as advice. Every judgment disguised as concern. Every quiet humiliation I swallowed to keep the peace. Then I thought of peace itself, and how I had finally tasted it. "No," I told him. "Just documentation. I'm done with them." He nodded. Probably a smart call. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Megan. "Everything in writing?" she asked. "Everything," I said. There was a brief pause. "Good," she replied. "Because as of tomorrow morning, I'm filing for divorce on your behalf. Not as a threat, not as a reaction, just as a final act of shutting a door that had been creaking on its hinges for years. The Hartwells wanted a villain for their story. Instead, they got a boundary. 6 months later, I sat on a wooden bench in the courthouse hallway, listening to the hum of old fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of paperwork echoing through the building. The divorce hearing had taken less than an hour. No theatrics, no speeches, no collapsing into tears. Just a judge who had seen every kind of human mess and had no patience for curated tragedy. She was an older woman with sharp glasses and an even sharper sense of truth. After hearing both sides, reviewing the documented complaints, the falsified accusations, the break-in, the social media smear campaign, she closed the file gently and looked at Emily the way a surgeon looks at a tumor before removing it, professionally, without emotion. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "you asked your husband to leave the home. You made public allegations you cannot substantiate. You attempted to sabotage his employment. You initiated instability and now want to claim financial dependency from the very man you targeted. That will not stand." And just like that, the gavel came down. No spousal support. No claims on my savings. No share of my retirement. Emily kept her car, a luxury import her parents bought her as an engagement gift, along with the loan attached to it. I kept everything else. The accounts, the furniture, and most importantly, my peace. Charles and Deborah sat behind her, stiff as mannequins left in the sun too long. When the judge brought up the anonymous ethics complaint traced to Charles's business email, he shifted in his seat like his suit suddenly didn't fit. Then came the quiet, final blow. The Hartwells had taken out a second mortgage to maintain appearances during the chaos. They'd refinanced the lake house for liquidity, and lost it 3 months later when payments lapsed. Last I heard, a retired couple from Colorado owned it now. They hung wind chimes on the deck railing, the same railing I'd built while Charles lectured me about presenting myself better in family photos. Emily moved back to her childhood bedroom. The pink walls were still there, painted when she was 13. She got a job selling artisan candles at a boutique that smelled like lavender and denial. Somewhere online, the Christmas photo finally appeared. Perfect white sweaters, perfect smiles, perfect backdrop. In the lower right corner, where I once stood, they'd placed a tall white vase full of neutral pampas grass. A man replaced with decor. Comments turned off. I didn't feel vindicated, not even bitter, just done. Now I live in a small loft in Houston. Exposed brick, tall windows, mismatched furniture I actually like. When sunlight hits the wall in the morning, it warms the room like a soft exhale. I make coffee in the quiet, real quiet, not the brittle kind filled with unspoken demands. Sometimes I sit on the floor with my mug, letting the steam fog the glass for a few seconds before the day starts. No one judges my posture. No one complains about the color of my mug. No one rearranges my belongings for aesthetic cohesion. It's imperfect, a little rough, a little industrial, a little me. Last week, I grabbed coffee with someone I'd met through a friend. Not a date, just two people talking. She walked into the loft and looked around with an appreciative smile. "This place," she said, running her fingers across the brick. "It has soul." I laughed quietly. "Yeah, kind of rustic." She nodded. "Rustic is good. Rustic means real." When she stepped out onto the balcony, I stayed behind for a moment, hand resting on the railing. The breeze from the street below drifted up, warm and steady, and under my breath, softly, almost like a truth I was finally allowed to say, I whispered, "But it's my kind of style. Not Emily's, not Charles's, not Deborah's, mine." For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's picture. I was simply living in my own.